My boyfriend said he needed to find himself and broke up with me, but forgot to delete me from his Find My Friends when he moved in with her. The breakup text arrived at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. 8 months together, and he couldn't even wait until morning. I deserve to discover who I truly am, without the constraints of a relationship, he wrote. Like he was some enlightened philosopher instead of a guy who still used his ex's Netflix password. I spent the first week doing what you're supposed to do. I cried into pints of ice cream. I deleted our photos. I blocked him on Instagram, but his little blue dot kept appearing on my phone, taunting me from that stupid app we'd set up during our third date when he insisted we needed to find each other at concerts. At first, I ignored it. Then curiosity crept in. His dot spent most nights at an apartment complex across town. The same apartment complex every single night. By week 3, I noticed a pattern. His location would disappear from the gym at 6:30 p.m., reappear at that apartment by 7 hours, and stay there until morning. Finding yourself doesn't typically involve a residential address. One night, my best friend Vanessa came over with wine. "You're watching his location again, aren't you?" she said, grabbing my phone. That's when we saw it. His dot was at a restaurant downtown. The same restaurant where he'd taken me for our 6-month anniversary, the one he claimed was too expensive to visit regularly. "Who goes to a fancy restaurant alone to find themselves?" Vanessa asked. We both knew the answer. The next morning, I did something I'm not proud of. I drove to that apartment complex and waited. At 8:15 a.m., he emerged with a blonde woman in yoga pants. They kissed goodbye like they'd done it 1,000 times before. She waved as he drove off, then stretched like she was about to go for a run. The math didn't add up. You don't build that kind of comfort in 3 weeks. I went home and checked his location history, scrolling back through our entire relationship. The sick feeling started in my stomach. Every time he'd claimed he was working late, his dot had been at that apartment. Every weekend he'd said he needed space. Every business trip that seemed too frequent, his dot had been there. He hadn't left me to find himself. He'd left me because he got caught juggling 2 lives and chose the other one. Vanessa suggested I confront him. My sister said to just move on. But I couldn't stop watching that blue dot, waiting for it to reveal something that would make sense of the betrayal. Then one Thursday night, his location pinged somewhere new. A clinic on the east side of town. The kind of clinic you don't visit unless something's wrong. He was there for 2 hours. When he left, his dot went straight to her apartment and stayed there all weekend. Monday morning, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. "I need to talk to you," the text said. "It's about him. Can we meet?" I stared at the message, my hands shaking. The number had a local area code. I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "I'm the other one," she wrote. And I think we both deserve the truth about what he's been doing. I sat in my car outside the coffee shop for 15 minutes before going inside. She was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 untouched lattes. The blonde from the apartment complex. Up close, she looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. "I'm Becca," she said quietly. "Thank you for coming." I slid into the chair across from her, my hands clenched in my lap. "How did you get my number?" "His phone bill," she said. "You were the most frequent contact until 3 weeks ago. Then nothing." She pushed one of the lattes toward me. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here because I found something, and I think you need to see it." She pulled out her phone and opened a photo album. The first picture was of her and him at a beach, his arm around her waist, both of them laughing. The timestamp said it was from last July. We'd been together since March. The next photo showed them at a wedding, then a birthday party, then Christmas morning, her wearing an engagement ring. "Wait," I said, my voice cracking. "You're engaged?" "Was engaged," she corrected. "He proposed in June. We were supposed to get married next month." She swiped to another photo, a save-the-date card with their names printed in elegant script. "Then last week I found out about you, and about the others." "Others?" Becca nodded slowly. "That clinic you saw him visit? I followed him there too. I thought maybe he was sick, that he needed support. But when I called pretending to be his wife, they told me he'd been there for STD testing. The results came back positive for something that requires partner notification." My stomach dropped. "Did he tell you?" "He told me I must have given it to him," she said bitterly. "Even though I've only been with him for 2 years. Even though I got tested and came back clean. So I started digging, found a second phone in his gym bag. That's when everything unraveled." She showed me screenshots from the burner phone, messages to at least 4 different women, all overlapping timelines, all the same promises about finding himself and needing space. One conversation was still active, dated from yesterday. "He's been running this pattern for years," Becca said. "Meets someone new, love bombs them for a few months, then creates drama so he can bounce between relationships whenever he gets bored. When one of us gets too demanding or starts asking questions, he moves us to the back burner and focuses on someone else." I thought about all the times he'd disappeared for days, claiming he needed to clear his head, the last-minute cancellations, the way he'd turn his phone face down whenever we were together. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I found something else," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Financial records. He's been stealing from us. Small amounts at first, then bigger. Remember that weekend trip he said he needed to fund for his mother's surgery?" I nodded. I'd given him $2,000. His mother's been dead for 5 years, and you weren't the only one he asked. There's a whole spreadsheet on that second phone. Names, amounts, dates. He's been systematically conning women out of money while keeping us all separated enough that none of us would compare notes. She pulled out a folder and laid it on the table. Inside were bank statements, screenshots, printed emails. The evidence was overwhelming. He'd stolen over $50,000 from various women over the past 3 years. I went to the police yesterday, Becca said. They told me that without more victims coming forward, it's hard to build a case. It becomes he said, she said. But if we can find the others, if we can show a pattern, she looked at me with desperate hope. Will you help me? I spent that night going through every text message, every email, every receipt from our relationship. Vanessa came over with her laptop and we created a timeline. Every lie had been meticulously crafted. The business trips that he claimed his company required were actually weekends with other women. The family emergencies were excuses to avoid commitment. Even his apartment, the one I'd never been invited to, turned out to be a short-term rental he kept just for appearances. This is insane, Vanessa said, staring at the spreadsheet we'd built. He had a whole system. He's still running it, I said, pointing to his location on my phone. He's at dinner right now, somewhere expensive on the waterfront. Vanessa looked at me. Want to crash it? We shouldn't have gone. I knew it even as we walked into the restaurant, even as I spotted him at a candlelit table with a brunette I'd never seen before. But something in me needed him to know that his careful construction was crumbling. He saw me before I reached the table. His face went pale, then red, then settled into that charming smile he always used when he was cornered. What are you doing here? Funny, I said. I could ask you the same thing. Weren't you supposed to be finding yourself? The brunette looked between us, confused. Who is this? Nobody, he said quickly. Just someone I used to know. I'm his girlfriend, I said at the same time. Or I was, until 3 weeks ago when he decided he needed space. Looks like he filled it pretty quickly. We broke up, he insisted to the brunette, his voice smooth and practiced. She's just having trouble letting go. Is that what you told Becca too? I asked. Because she seems to think you two are engaged, or were before she found out about the STDs you've been spreading around. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. You need to leave. Now. Or what? Vanessa stepped forward. You'll call the cops? Please do. I'm sure they'd love to hear about your little side business. The brunette grabbed her purse. What is she talking about? Ask him about the $2,000 he probably borrowed from you, I said. Some story about a family emergency or medical bills. He's very good at those stories. She looked at him, her face changing. You said your brother needed surgery. See? I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of Becca's evidence folder. You're not the first, and you won't be the last unless we stop him. The restaurant manager appeared, asking us to lower our voices. Other diners were staring. He grabbed his coat and pushed past us toward the door. I followed him into the parking lot, Vanessa right behind me. You've lost your mind, he hissed. This is harassment. This is justice, I said. Did you really think you could keep this going forever? That none of us would ever figure it out? Figure what out? That I'm not interested in being tied down to one person? That I like to keep my options open? There's no crime in that. There is when you're stealing money under false pretenses, Vanessa said. And when you're knowingly exposing people to diseases. He laughed. Actually laughed. Good luck proving any of that. You think anyone's going to believe a bunch of bitter ex-girlfriends who can't accept that I moved on? That's when Becca's car pulled into the parking lot. She'd been waiting down the street, following his location just like I had been. She got out holding her phone up, recording. Say that again. The part about knowingly exposing people. His face changed. You're all insane. We have the medical records, Becca said calmly. The ones from your doctor's portal that you left logged in on your laptop. The ones showing you were diagnosed 2 months before you got tested at that clinic. And we have messages from you telling 3 different women you'd been tested and were clean during that same time period. I watched him calculate, watched him realize the walls were closing in. This is entrapment. This is documentation, I said. And there are 5 other women we've found so far who are willing to testify about the money you stole. That's not a dating preference. That's fraud. He got in his car without another word and drove off. His location disappeared from my phone an hour later. He'd finally figured out to delete me from Find My Friends. The police took our statements the next morning. With 6 women reporting similar patterns of deception and financial manipulation, they agreed to investigate. The detective, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, listened to our timeline with increasing disgust. I've seen this before, she said. Relationship fraud is harder to prosecute than people think. He'll claim everything was gifts, that you all knew about each other, that it's just drama between consenting adults. But the medical records, Becca started, those help, the detective admitted. Knowingly exposing partners to STDs without disclosure is a crime in this state. But you'll need all of them to press charges, and you'll need to prove he knew he was infected when he exposed you. We left the station feeling deflated. Vanessa drove me home in silence. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. You stupid bitches have no idea what you've started. I'm going to ruin all of you. I showed it to Vanessa. She took the phone and forwarded it to the detective. Save everything, she said. Every threat, every message. He's spiraling. She was right. Over the next week, the messages escalated. He created fake social media accounts to harass us. He called our jobs claiming we were stealing from him. He showed up at Becca's apartment at 2 a.m., pounding on the door until her neighbors called the police. The restraining order was granted after that incident. 3 of us filed together, presenting a united front. The judge looked at the evidence, looked at him sitting there in his expensive suit, trying to charm his way out of consequences, and granted the order without hesitation. But the criminal case was moving slowly. Turns out, proving fraud in romantic relationships requires meeting a high burden of proof. His lawyer argued that everything was consensual, that we'd all willingly given him money, that our hurt feelings didn't constitute a crime. The turning point came from an unexpected source. One of the other women, Isabel, worked in banking. She'd noticed something in the financial records Becca had shared. The amounts he'd stolen from each of us corresponded exactly to deposits he'd made into an investment account. Not a personal account, a business account. Isabel pulled the corporate filings. He'd registered an LLC 6 months ago, naming himself as the sole owner. The business description was vague, something about consulting services, but the money trail was clear. He'd been systematically funneling our loans into this business account, using our money to invest in cryptocurrency and day trading. This changes everything, the detective said when we brought her the information. This isn't relationship drama anymore. This is wire fraud. This is money laundering. This is a whole different ballgame. The FBI got involved after that. Turns out he'd been running similar schemes in 2 other states before moving here. There were more women, more victims, more money. The investigation expanded to include interstate fraud charges. He hired a better lawyer, started a GoFundMe claiming he was being persecuted by vengeful exes, posted long rants on social media about how the justice system was broken, how men couldn't even date anymore without being accused of crimes. Some people believed him. His comments filled with supporters, mostly men complaining about false accusations, and women who couldn't handle rejection. But more victims kept coming forward. Women who'd seen his face on the news, who recognized the pattern, who realized they'd been part of the same con. By month 3, there were 18 of us. 18 women across 4 states, some dating back 5 years. The total amount stolen exceeded $200,000, and every single one of us had been exposed to the same STD, which he'd contracted from the first victim and never disclosed to anyone else. The trial was set for 6 months out. In the meantime, we formed a group chat, all 18 of us sharing our stories, supporting each other through the legal process. What started as a fraud investigation turned into a support group for relationship trauma. "I can't believe I fell for it," one woman wrote late one night. "All the red flags were there." "We all fell for it," another responded. "That's what con artists do. They're professionals." Becca organized weekly video calls where we could talk through what had happened. Some women were angry, some were embarrassed, some were just tired. But we all showed up, week after week, because there was power in knowing we weren't alone. My sister asked me why I was spending so much time on this. "He's going to jail anyway. Why keep reliving it?" "Because," I said, "if we don't tell our stories, if we don't stand together, the next group of women won't know to watch out. And there will be a next group. Men like him don't stop until they're forced to stop." The trial lasted 3 weeks. We all testified, one after another, laying out the same pattern of manipulation and theft. His lawyer tried to paint us as bitter, scorned women seeking revenge, but the evidence was overwhelming. The fake businesses, the medical records, the detailed financial trail, the screenshots of him admitting to his schemes in messages he thought had been deleted. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. He was found guilty on 14 counts of fraud, 6 counts of reckless endangerment, and 3 counts of money laundering. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a month later. I thought I'd feel triumphant when the verdict came in. Instead, I just felt empty. Watching him being led away in handcuffs didn't erase the 8 months I'd wasted believing his lies, didn't undo the damage to my ability to trust, didn't give back the money or the time or the version of myself that existed before I knew people like him were real. At the sentencing hearing, we were each given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. I'd written mine out a dozen times, trying to find the right words to explain what he'd stolen beyond just money. When my turn came, I stood at the podium and looked directly at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "You told me you needed to find yourself," I said. But the person I found was someone who saw other human beings as resources to exploit. Someone who calculated exactly how much he could take before we'd notice. Someone who weighed the risks and decided our pain was worth it. I paused, watching him stare at the table. "You didn't just steal money from us. You stole our ability to trust the next person who says they love us. You stole months or years of our lives that we can never get back. You stole our sense of safety and certainty about our own judgment." Other women read their statements with shaking voices. Isabel talked about the panic attacks she now had in new relationships. Becca described canceling her wedding and moving back home with her parents. One woman explained how she'd lost her job because of the stress and harassment. The judge listened to everything, making notes. When the last statement was finished, she looked at him with open contempt. "You are a predator," she said. "Not in the traditional sense, but a predator nonetheless. You identified vulnerable women, gained their trust, and exploited them systematically. The level of planning and manipulation you exhibited demonstrates a complete absence of empathy or remorse." She sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, with orders to pay full restitution to every victim. 12 years. It didn't feel like enough and also felt like too much. I couldn't parse my own feelings. Walking out of the courthouse, Becca grabbed my hand. "We did it," she said. "Yeah," I said. "We did." Life moved forward in strange ways after that. The group chat stayed active, though it shifted from legal updates to personal ones. Isabel got engaged to someone new and invited all of us to the wedding. One woman started a nonprofit helping other victims of relationship fraud navigate the legal system. Becca wrote a book about her experience. I went back to therapy, started dating again, though every new relationship came with a learning curve of paranoia and background checks. Vanessa helped me install security cameras and change all my passwords. My sister bought me a location tracker for my car, which I found both touching and depressing. The money came back slowly, in court-ordered installments garnished from the prison job he'd been assigned, $20 a month. It would take decades to recover what he'd stolen. But it wasn't really about the money anymore. His location never appeared on my phone again, obviously. But sometimes I'd pull up the app anyway, looking at that empty map where his blue dot used to taunt me, remembering how I'd watched him move between lies, between women, between versions of himself that were all equally fake. Finding yourself. What a convenient excuse for destroying other people. He'd claimed he needed space to grow and discover who he truly was. Turns out who he truly was had been there all along. We'd just been too blinded by his performance to see it. 6 months after the trial, I got a letter forwarded through my lawyer. Prison mail, his name on the return address. My hands shook as I held it. Part of me wanted to burn it without reading, but curiosity won. The letter was 2 pages long, single-spaced, written in careful handwriting. It started with an apology that sounded like it had been coached by a therapist or lawyer, acknowledged the harm caused, took responsibility, at least in vague terms. Then it shifted, explained how he'd grown up with a father who taught him that nice guys finish last, how he'd been bullied in school and learned that the only way to survive was to control the narrative, how his first real relationship had ended with her cheating, which broke something fundamental in his ability to trust. The letter ended with a request. Could I find it in my heart to forgive him? Not for his sake, but for mine, because holding on to anger would only poison my own future. Because he was working on himself in prison, attending programs, reading books about emotional intelligence and healthy relationships. Because he hoped that someday, somehow, he could make real amends. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it back up and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Didn't write back or send the forgiveness he was asking for. Maybe that made me petty. Maybe it made me someone who couldn't let go. Or maybe it just meant I understood that forgiveness isn't something you give because someone asks for it. It's something you earn through changed behavior, through demonstrated growth, through time and consistency and proof. He had 12 years to work on that. I had the rest of my life to decide if I wanted to care. Vanessa asked me about the letter over coffee. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said. He doesn't get my emotional labor anymore, not even my anger. That's very evolved of you. It's very tired of me, I corrected. I'm just exhausted by the whole thing. By having to explain it at parties when people ask why I'm cautious about dating apps. By flinching every time someone wants to borrow money. By this weird reality where I have 17 other women in a group chat who understand exactly what I've been through. But you do have them, Vanessa pointed out. That's something. She was right. The group chat had become its own kind of support system. We celebrated birthdays and promotions, commiserated over bad dates and good ones that ended badly, shared articles about narcissistic personality disorder and relationship red flags. Some of us met up in person when we were in the same city. We'd gone from being his victims to being each other's advocates. Isabel's wedding was beautiful. All 18 of us attended, a strange sisterhood forged from shared trauma. During the reception, Becca stood up and made a toast. To the women who refused to stay silent, she said. To the ones who chose truth over convenience. To everyone here who learned that finding yourself doesn't require destroying someone else. We raised our glasses. In that moment, surrounded by women who understood, I felt something shift. Not quite healing, but maybe the beginning of it. My new therapist said that trauma rewires your brain in unexpected ways. Makes you see patterns where none exist. Makes you question your own judgment in ways that can be paralyzing. But it also teaches you about your own resilience. About the difference between being naive and being hopeful. About the fact that being hurt doesn't mean you were stupid. It just means you were human. I started dating someone new 8 months after the trial. His name was Harrison, and he worked in software development. Our first date was coffee, which stretched into dinner, which turned into a walk through the city that lasted until midnight. He was funny and kind and seemed genuinely interested in my terrible stories about customers at the bookstore where I worked. On our 3rd date, I told him about the trial, watched his face carefully for signs of judgment, or the way men sometimes look at women they've decided are damaged goods. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions, wondered how I was doing now, didn't try to fix it or minimize it or tell me I should be over it by now. That must have been terrifying, he said. Not just the fraud part, but realizing you couldn't trust your own instincts. Yeah, I said quietly. That's exactly it. For what it's worth, Harrison said. Your instincts seem pretty good to me. You saw the red flags eventually. You took action. You helped other people. That's not someone with bad judgment. That's someone who got deliberately deceived by an expert. I started crying right there in the restaurant. Harrison handed me napkins and waited patiently while I pulled myself together. Didn't make a big deal out of it. Didn't tell me not to cry or that everything would be okay. Just sat there being present in the discomfort. Sorry, I said finally. I'm not usually this much of a mess on dates. Everyone's a mess, he said. Some of us are just better at hiding it. We took things slowly. He met Vanessa and my sister before we made anything official. Let me have full access to his phone and location without making it weird. Introduced me to his friends and family early so I could verify he was who he claimed to be. Never pressured me for money or made me feel guilty about my caution. 6 months in, I still had moments of panic. Times when Harrison would be late responding to a text, and my brain would spiral into worst-case scenarios. Times when I'd check his location obsessively, looking for evidence of betrayal that wasn't there. Times when I'd push him away for no reason except that getting hurt felt inevitable. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust anyone again, I told my therapist. Trust isn't binary, she said. It's not something you either have or don't have. It's something you build gradually, in small increments, through consistent evidence that someone is safe. Harrison was safe. He proved it day after day, in boring and undramatic ways, showing up when he said he would, being honest about his feelings, introducing me to his world instead of keeping me separate from it, never asking me to ignore my instincts or doubt my own reality. The 1-year anniversary of the verdict came and went. The group chat acknowledged it with a mixture of relief and residual anger. Some women had moved on completely, barely checking the messages anymore. Others, like me, still found comfort in knowing we weren't alone. Becca's book came out that month. She sent copies to all of us, inscribed with personal messages. Mine said, "Thank you for being brave enough to stand up. You started this avalanche." I cried reading the acknowledgement section where she thanked each victim by first initial, describing how their courage had made everything possible. The book did well, got reviewed in major publications. Becca started getting interview requests from podcasts and news shows. She was nervous about the attention, but also determined to use the platform. "If our story can help even one person spot these red flags earlier," she said, "then maybe all of this meant something." I watched her on a morning talk show, telling a condensed version of what had happened. The host asked if she regretted not seeing the signs sooner. Becca's response was perfect. "I regret that someone chose to hurt me," she said, "but I don't regret being someone who was capable of love and trust. The problem wasn't that I was too naive. The problem was that he was deliberately deceptive, and that's on him, not me." The comment section filled with stories from other women, some who'd experienced similar situations, some who were currently stuck in relationships they suddenly recognized as predatory, some who just wanted to say thank you for speaking up. A producer reached out about turning the story into a documentary. Then a streaming service wanted to make it a limited series. Becca consulted with all of us before agreeing to anything. We voted democratically on whether to participate. In the end, 12 of us agreed to be interviewed. The others wanted privacy, which we all respected. Filming the documentary was strange. Sitting in a studio with professional lights, telling my story to a camera crew who nodded sympathetically at all the right moments. They asked me to describe the moment I realized I'd been conned, the moment I decided to fight back, the moment the verdict came in. I did my best to articulate feelings that still felt too big and complicated for words. When I watched the rough cut months later, I barely recognized myself. The woman on screen looked stronger than I felt. More certain, more healed. But maybe that's what growth looks like from the outside. Maybe we're never as broken as we feel in the moment. Harrison came to the documentary premiere with me, held my hand through the screening as I watched my life played out on a screen for strangers to witness. The audience was silent during the heavy parts, gasped at the revelations, applauded when the verdict was shown. When the lights came up, people surrounded us wanting to share their own stories, or thank us for speaking out. An older woman grabbed my hand in the lobby. "My daughter is dating someone who sounds exactly like him," she said, tears in her eyes. "She won't listen to me, but maybe she'll listen to this. Maybe seeing your story will help her see hers." I gave her my number and Becca's contact information. "Tell her she's not alone," I said. "Tell her there's an army of us who understand." The documentary got picked up by a major platform. Suddenly, strangers were recognizing me at the grocery store. My inbox flooded with messages from women all over the world sharing their experiences. Some had reported their abusers. Some were too afraid. Some just needed someone to believe them. I started volunteering with the nonprofit Isabel had created. We offered free legal consultations and connected victims with resources, testified at state hearings about strengthening fraud laws, lobbied for better protections against relationship exploitation, turned our collective trauma into something resembling purpose. 2 years after the trial, he became eligible for parole. The thought sent ice through my veins. The group chat exploded with anxiety and anger. We all wrote letters to the parole board, attended the hearing in person, a united front of women who refused to let him minimize what he'd done. His lawyer argued that he'd been a model prisoner, completed every rehabilitation program available, found religion, written extensively in his journal about taking responsibility and wanting to make amends. He'd even started a prison support group for men working through their own toxic behaviors. When it was his turn to speak, he looked directly at us. "I was a coward," he said, his voice shaking. "I hurt people because it made me feel powerful. Because I told myself that everyone else was just as selfish as me, so why shouldn't I take what I wanted? But sitting in here for 2 years, I've had to face what I really am. Not what I pretended to be, but what I actually did to real people with real lives." He continued, describing his journey through therapy and self-reflection, acknowledged specific harms, named ways he'd manipulated each of us, didn't make excuses or blame his childhood or his ex or society, just owned it. Part of me wanted to believe he'd changed, the part that still remembered falling in love with the person he'd pretended to be. But belief isn't the same as trust, and trust has to be earned over time, not performed in front of a parole board. The board denied his parole. They cited the systematic nature of his crimes, the number of victims, the calculated planning involved, said he could apply again in 2 years with continued good behavior and progress. Walking out of that hearing, I felt both relief and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe disappointment that people don't transform as easily as we'd like them to. Maybe sadness that someone I'd once cared about had turned out to be such a hollow shell of performance and manipulation. Do you think he's really changed? Isabel asked later at dinner. I think he's learned to perform remorse as skillfully as he performed love, Becca said. That's his talent. Becoming whoever he needs to be to get what he wants. Maybe that's not fair, I said quietly. Maybe people can change. Maybe we're the ones who can't see past who he was. Or maybe, Vanessa said, you're just a more generous person than the rest of us. And that's okay too. Harrison and I got engaged that spring. He proposed on an ordinary Tuesday, no dramatic gesture or public spectacle. Just the two of us in my apartment. Him looking nervous as he pulled out a ring and asked if I'd be willing to build a life together. I said yes while crying and laughing at the same time. Planning the wedding brought unexpected triggers. Every vendor who asked for deposits made my stomach clench. Every time Harrison mentioned joint bank accounts or shared assets, I had flashbacks to financial records and fraud. My therapist helped me work through it, but progress was slow and nonlinear. The wedding was small, immediate family and close friends. All 17 of the other women were invited. They showed up in force, a reminder that I'd survived worse than cold feet and budget discussions. During the reception, they formed a circle around me, and we danced to old pop songs we'd shared in the group chat during the worst moments. You made it, Becca whispered while hugging me. You didn't let him destroy your capacity for this. We made it, I corrected. All of us. Life settled into something resembling normal after that. Harrison and I bought a house. I got promoted at the bookstore. Started writing about my experience, not for publication, but just to process everything that had happened. The group chat stayed active, but shifted more toward regular life updates than trauma processing. Then, 3 years after the trial, I got a call from the detective who'd worked our case. He'd been arrested again. Same pattern, different state, new victims. Apparently, he'd only served 4 years before making parole, had moved across the country, and immediately started running the same schemes under a slightly different methodology. We need you to testify, the detective said. Show the pattern of behavior. Help these new victims understand they're not alone and this wasn't their fault. I looked at Harrison, who nodded supportively. Looked at the life we'd built, the stability I'd found, the healing I'd done. Thought about starting over, reliving everything in another courtroom, opening old wounds that had just started to scar over. Then I thought about the women he'd just victimized, how they were probably sitting in their apartments right now, feeling stupid and ashamed and confused, how they might be blaming themselves for not seeing the signs, how they needed to know that this wasn't their failure, it was his pattern. I'll testify, I said. Whatever you need. The second trial was easier and harder than the first. Easier because I knew what to expect, had experience with the legal process, understood how to tell my story in a way that a jury could understand. Harder because I'd hoped never to have to do this again. Because it proved that monsters don't stay locked up, that justice isn't permanent, that vigilance has to be eternal. The new victims were younger than our group had been, fresh out of college, just starting their careers, still believing the world was fundamentally fair and people were fundamentally good. I recognized that version of myself in their faces, the one who'd existed before I learned that some people are just predators in human clothing. One of them, Celeste, approached me during a break in the proceedings. Did it get better? She asked. After the first trial? After you testified? Did you ever feel normal again? I considered lying to comfort her, telling her that time heals all wounds, and she'd forget this ever happened. But she deserved the truth. It got different, I said. Not better, exactly. You don't unlearn what you've learned about how cruel people can be, but you learn to build a life anyway. You learn that being hurt doesn't mean you're broken, and you find people who understand, who see your scars and don't flinch away from them. She nodded slowly. I keep thinking I should have known, like there was some obvious sign I missed. He's a professional, I said. This is what he does. He studies people, finds their vulnerabilities, exploits them with surgical precision. You didn't fail some test. You just encountered someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of deception. How do you ever trust anyone again? Slowly, I admitted, with a lot of therapy and patience and people who prove themselves worthy of it. And you accept that some part of you will always be guarded now. But guarded isn't the same as closed off. You can still let people in, you just do it more carefully. The second verdict came back guilty on all counts. This time the judge added an enhancement for being a repeat offender. 25 years, with requirements that he register as a financial predator upon release and submit to ongoing monitoring. It still didn't feel like enough. No amount of prison time could undo what he'd stolen from so many lives. But watching the new victims hug each other in the hallway afterward, seeing their relief at being believed and validated, I understood why we kept doing this. Why we kept showing up, keep telling our stories, kept refusing to let him fade into comfortable obscurity. Because every time he tried to run this con again, there would be a record, evidence. Women who would stand up and say, we know who he really is. I wrote about the second trial in my journal that night, processed the strange sensation of seeing him again after years of actively trying to forget his face. He'd aged in prison, new lines around his eyes, gray threading through his hair. For a moment, I felt something like pity. Then I remembered the calculated coldness in his voice when he'd threatened us, the way he'd laughed at our pain, the spreadsheet where he'd tracked his thefts like a game with a high score. Pity was an emotion he'd learned to manufacture and exploit. I wouldn't let him have mine. How are you feeling? Harrison asked when I finally closed the journal. Tired, I said. So incredibly tired, but also relieved that it's over. Again, for now. Do you think there will be a third time? Probably, I admitted. Men like him don't change. They just adapt. He'll figure out what went wrong this time and adjust his methodology. Find new hunting grounds, new techniques, new ways to exploit trust. But at least now there's a record. At least the next group of women will have something to reference when they start seeing the red flags. The documentary got updated with footage from the second trial. The new version showed how predatory patterns persist even after consequences, how the justice system struggles to protect people from repeat offenders who specialize in relationship crimes, how victims have to keep fighting long after they thought the battle was over. It won an award at a film festival. Becca gave a speech about the importance of believing women and taking financial abuse seriously. The nonprofit expanded to 3 states, offering services to hundreds of victims. I watched all of this from a distance, participating when needed but mostly trying to live my own life. Harrison and I talked about starting a family. I got accepted into a graduate program for social work, thinking maybe I could turn this experience into a career helping others navigate trauma. The group chat celebrated every milestone with the enthusiasm of people who understand how hard-won happiness can be. 5 years after the first trial, I was pregnant with my first child, a daughter. Harrison and I spent months debating names, trying to find one that felt both beautiful and strong. We landed on Iris after my grandmother, who'd survived her own share of hardships with grace. Being pregnant brought up unexpected emotions. Fear about bringing a child into a world where people like him existed. Determination to raise her with better instincts than I'd had. Better boundaries. Better bullshit detectors. Anger that I even had to think about how to protect her from predators before she was even born. "You're going to be a great mother," Vanessa said at my baby shower. "You've already survived one of the worst things that can happen. Everything else is just details." "What if she makes the same mistakes I did?" I asked quietly. "What if she trusts someone who doesn't deserve it?" "Then you'll help her through it," Vanessa said. "Just like we helped each other. That's all any of us can do. Be there for the people we love when they stumble." Iris was born on a Tuesday morning in October. 10 fingers, 10 toes, lungs that could shatter glass with her crying. Harrison cried holding her for the first time. I cried watching him cry. The nurse smiled and said something about how beautiful new families always made her emotional too. Bringing her home felt like crossing some invisible threshold into a different version of my life, the one where I wasn't defined by what had happened to me anymore, where I could be just a mother and a wife and a graduate student instead of a victim or survivor or advocate. But those identities don't disappear just because you want them to. They layer on top of each other, creating someone more complicated than I'd been before. The group chat flooded with congratulations and advice. Isabel sent a care package filled with organic baby clothes. Becca wrote a children's book about a brave little girl who learns to trust her instincts. Celeste, who'd stayed in touch after the second trial, painted a portrait of Iris from the photos I'd shared. "You have 17 aunties who will help protect you," I whispered to Iris during late-night feedings, "and a mom who will teach you how to be kind without being naive, strong without being hard, trusting without being foolish." She stared at me with unfocused newborn eyes, completely unaware of the weight of history she'd been born into. I hoped I could shield her from the worst of it while still preparing her for reality. It felt like an impossible balance. Months passed in a blur of diapers and sleep deprivation. I deferred graduate school for a year, needing time to adjust to motherhood. Harrison took parental leave and we figured out how to be partners in this new configuration. Date nights became rare and precious. Showers became victories. 8 hours of sleep became a distant fantasy. Through it all, the group chat remained constant. Women who'd started as fellow victims had become genuine friends. We shared parenting advice and job frustrations and relationship updates. Sometimes we'd go weeks without mentioning him at all. Other times someone would have a triggering experience and we'd rally around them with understanding that no one else could provide. On Iris's first birthday, I wrote her a letter, told her about the year she was born, about the trial that had preceded her existence, about the community of women who would always have her back. Sealed it in an envelope with instructions to give it to her when she turned 18, old enough to understand but young enough to still need the guidance. The letter ended with this: "You were born from love, but also from survival. Your mother learned what the worst of humanity looks like, and chose to bring you into the world anyway. That's not naivety. That's hope. And hope, it turns out, is the bravest thing any of us can choose after we've seen the darkness. I hope you inherit that bravery. I hope you inherit the wisdom to spot red flags without becoming so cynical that you miss the green lights. I hope you inherit a world where women are believed and protected and valued. But if you don't, I hope you inherit the strength to fight for it anyway." I sealed the letter and tucked it into her baby box, alongside the hospital bracelet and first outfit and footprint molds. Evidence that she'd existed from the very beginning as her own person, separate from my history. Life continued forward. Iris learned to walk and talk. I went back to graduate school. Harrison got promoted. We moved to a bigger house with a yard. The group chat stayed active through promotions and breakups and weddings and losses. We became part of each other's ongoing stories, not just the shared trauma that had brought us together. Sometimes I'd pull up Find My Friends out of habit, looking at the empty map where his blue dot used to mock me. The app had added new features over the years, better privacy controls, options to hide your location from specific people. I never needed them anymore. He was still in prison, probably would be for another decade at least. But sometimes I'd check anyway, making sure the digital ghost of him was truly gone. "What are you looking at?" Harrison asked one night, catching me staring at my phone. "Nothing," I said, closing the app. "Just old habits." You know he can't hurt you anymore, right? He's locked up. You're safe. We're safe. I know, I said. And I did know, intellectually. But trauma rewires your brain in ways that logic. Some part of me would probably always be checking over my shoulder, always be waiting for the other shoe to drop, always be mapping exit strategies even in safe situations. That was just the cost of having survived. Therapy helped. So did time. So did building a life so full of genuine love and stability that the past became just one chapter, instead of the whole story. But healing isn't linear and it's never complete. You don't arrive at some destination where you're fixed. You just learn to carry the weight more gracefully. Iris started preschool, made friends easily, laughed constantly, trusted everyone she met. Watching her move through the world with that kind of openness was both beautiful and terrifying. I wanted to wrap her in bubble wrap, teach her suspicion, protect her from ever experiencing betrayal. But I also wanted her to have the childhood I'd had before everything went wrong. The one where people were generally good, and the world was generally safe, and love was generally real. You're hovering, Harrison said gently as I watched her play with other kids at the park. I'm observing. You're panicking. He was right. I was panicking. Every child's scraped knee felt like a catastrophe I'd failed to prevent. Every social slight felt like the beginning of bullying. Every stranger who smiled at her felt like a potential threat. How do people do this? I asked. How do they let their kids just exist in the world without constant surveillance? They either didn't go through what you did, or they're better at compartmentalizing, Harrison said. But you can't protect her from everything, and trying to will just teach her to be afraid. I knew he was right, but knowing and doing are different things. I compromised by giving her the freedom to explore while staying close enough to intervene if needed. It was exhausting, maintaining that balance. But she seemed happy, which had to count for something. The 10-year anniversary of meeting him came and went without fanfare. I marked it only in my journal, noting how strange it felt that a person who'd consumed so much of my life for so long now barely registered as a thought most days. He'd become a story I told sometimes, a cautionary tale, a reason I advocated for better laws. But he wasn't the center of my universe anymore. That same year, Becca got married to someone she'd met through the nonprofit. He'd been volunteering as a legal advisor, had heard her story, had fallen in love with her strength and vulnerability in equal measure. Their wedding was beautiful, all of us in attendance again, celebrating how far she'd come from that first meeting in a coffee shop where she'd shown me evidence of our shared deception. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? I asked her during the reception. Honestly, Becca said, I imagined being dead. In those first months after everything fell apart, I couldn't see a future beyond the pain. But then you and Vanessa showed up, and suddenly I wasn't alone. And not being alone made it possible to survive another day, then another. Then eventually, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I'm glad you survived, I said, hugging her. We all are. The documentary got used in criminal justice classes and therapy training programs. Our story became a case study in coercive control and financial abuse. Law review articles cited the case when arguing for stronger protections. His name became synonymous with a particular type of predator, the charming con artist who weaponizes intimacy. Sometimes people who'd read about the case would recognize my name and ask about it. Early on, I'd shut down those conversations immediately. But as time passed, I found myself more willing to discuss it. Not because I enjoyed reliving the trauma, but because sharing the experience helped other people identify their own situations or validate their own instincts. How did you know something was wrong? They'd ask. I didn't. Not at first. I'd always answer honestly. The red flags only make sense in hindsight. But once I started paying attention, once I allowed myself to trust my own discomfort, everything became clearer. Iris turned 5. Started kindergarten. Came home with art projects and new vocabulary words and stories about playground politics. She was bright and kind and occasionally frustratingly stubborn. So much of her reminded me of myself at that age, before I'd learned to doubt my own perceptions. One day, she came home upset because a boy in her class had lied about sharing his toy, then blamed her when the teacher asked about it. Why would he do that? She asked, genuinely confused by the concept of deliberate deception. I knelt down to her level. Some people lie to avoid getting in trouble, and sometimes people lie because it makes them feel powerful to trick others. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong for believing him, but I feel stupid. You're not stupid for being honest and expecting others to be honest too. That's actually a really good quality. You just learned that not everyone operates the same way you do, and that's valuable information. She thought about this seriously. So what do I do now? You be more careful around him. You listen to your instincts when something feels off, but you don't let one liar make you suspicious of everyone. Most people are good. You just have to pay attention to the ones who aren't. It was the same advice my therapist had given me a decade ago. The same wisdom I'd tried to internalize through years of healing. And now I was passing it on to the next generation, hoping it would serve her better than it had served me. That night, I added another entry to the letter I was writing for Iris's 18th birthday. Told her about this conversation, about how her 5-year-old brain was already grappling with concepts of trust and deception. Told her I hoped she'd never need the hard-won knowledge I had about protecting yourself from predators. But if she did, I hoped she'd remember that being victimized doesn't mean you were weak or stupid. It just means you encountered someone whose whole existence was built on exploitation. The group chat had quieted over the years as people moved on with their lives. But we still checked in on anniversaries and birthdays, still reached out when triggers hit, still showed up for each other in ways that proved our connection was real beyond the trauma that had forged it. Isabel's nonprofit had helped over 2,000 victims navigate the legal system. Becca's book had sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Celeste had become a therapist specializing in helping people recover from intimate partner fraud. We'd all taken our pain and transformed it into something purposeful. But purpose doesn't erase trauma. It just gives it context, makes it feel less meaningless, allows you to believe that suffering wasn't entirely wasted if it can prevent someone else's suffering. That's the story we tell ourselves to make peace with surviving. Whether it's true or just necessary fiction, I still don't know. What I do know is this. I'm 40 now, happily married to someone who proved trustworthy through a decade of consistent behavior. Mother to a daughter who still believes the world is fundamentally good. Friend to 16 women who understand the specific shape of my scars. Advocate for laws that might protect the next generation from the kind of predator we all encountered. His parole hearing is coming up again next year. He'll be eligible after serving 20 of his 25-year sentence. Part of me hopes he's genuinely changed this time. A larger part knows that hoping is just another form of vulnerability I can't afford. The safest assumption is that he's learned to perform remorse even more skillfully, and some future group of women will be his next targets when he inevitably finds freedom. But that's not my responsibility anymore. I've done my part. Testified twice. Helped establish legal precedent. Supported other victims. Written my story. Raised awareness. Now I get to just be Iris's mom and Harrison's wife and a social worker who happens to have personal expertise in relationship trauma. The blue dot is gone from my map. His location, his life, his schemes are no longer my concern. I deleted Find My Friends entirely last month, realizing I didn't need to track anyone anymore. The people in my life are exactly where they say they'll be. And if they're not, I'll know because they've proven themselves trustworthy enough that deception would be obvious. That's the real ending to this story. Not justice or revenge or perfect healing. Just the slow accumulation of days where he doesn't matter anymore. Where my life is so full of genuine connection that the ghost of his manipulation fades into something small and distant. Where I can tell this whole saga like it happened to someone else. Because in many ways, it did. The woman who fell for his lies doesn't exist anymore. She was transformed by survival into someone wiser and harder and simultaneously more open. Someone who knows the worst of humanity but chose hope anyway. Sometimes Vanessa asks if I regret any of it. If I wish I could go back and avoid that first meeting, sidestep the whole catastrophe. And honestly, I don't know. That relationship destroyed something innocent in me, but it also revealed strength I didn't know I had. Connected me with people I'd have never met otherwise. Taught me lessons about manipulation and resilience that now help others. Made me the kind of mother who can teach her daughter nuanced truths about trust and deception instead of naive platitudes about everyone being good. So maybe the answer isn't regret or gratitude. Maybe it's just acceptance. This thing happened. It shaped me. I survived it. And now I get to decide what comes next. That's the power he couldn't steal, no matter how carefully he planned his cons or how many victims he collected. The power to choose who I become after the trauma. To refuse to let his cruelty be the final word on my story. The blue dot is gone. I'm still here. And that, after everything, feels like its own kind of victory.